As we were as we were saying earlier, right? We were talking about the religious Jewish state, how it should be run according to according to the Jewish religion, how it should be run by the Torah, and that the state of Israel, that they fought for the independence and they tried to help Algeria. But the people who are empowered, the European, let's call them European Jews for to simplify it, they wanted to push to be in the Western orbit instead of the environment they were in, which is a Semitic orbit. Hello.
Yeah, that's correct. Sorry.
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
would you?
let's just say we could say the Zionists or the labor Zionists really do. I mean, in Israel they're called the left, which is really not, that doesn't make any sense. But what's historically called the left in Israel are the ones who want Israel to be part of the West, whereas what's often called the right in Israel are those who are looking for more of a Jewish state and are mostly coming from other parts of the Middle East. I mean, mostly Mizrahi Jews, Jews more connected to Torah, Haredim, national religious, whereas the kind of more westernized Ashkenazi and often more powerful and more wealthy Jews are what we call the left here. It's weird. It doesn't really make sense. But yeah, they wanted Israel to be connected to France at that time. Um, we could argue that we were getting our weapons from France, and that's what they saw as like the number one priority. I get it, but the Jews who actually fought to drive the British out of Palestine and have an independent state wanted to see Israel aligned with the Algerians, not with the French. Um, so that's what happened then. But again, the idea was that Israel be a revolutionary state that be allied and unified with its neighbors and on the side of the oppressed everywhere. That's not what happened. That's not what we ended up becoming, but maybe it's not too late. But I think that obviously to really think about Israel as a revolutionary state that stands up for the oppressed, we would have to really start with the oppressed within our borders. And we'd have to really take a look at the Palestinian question and ask ourselves an important question from a Jewish perspective: what is the ideal role of somebody who is not Jewish in our land? Now, what's interesting, I'll tell you something that you'll probably find very interesting.
Mm.
Historically speaking, there was a group of people that were our allies that were not us. They're called the Kenim, the Kenites. Okay, they were
Canaanites.
no, 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 not Canaanites, Kenites. Two
Oh,
different.
okay.
The
Okay.
Kenites were, for the most part, the descendants of Yitro, who was the father-in-law of Moshe, of Moses.
Mm-hmm. It's in the Quran, yes.
Right. So
Yeah.
these guys were living in our land with us, a population that were allied to us, but they were not us. They didn't become Israelites. They remained Kenites.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one of them actually becomes a hero of Jewish history. Her name is Yael. She actually killed the Canaanite general Sisera. It's in the book of Judges 4. And what ends up happening is even though she's not an Israelite, she becomes a hero of our history to the point that to this day, 3,000 years later, we're still naming our daughters after her. Now, an interesting anecdote a lot of people don't know: there was a translation of our Torah in Aramaic, which used to be the major language of the region. There was an Aramaic
Mm-hmm.
translation of our Torah around the first century. It was called the Targum Onkelos. And this was like the Aramaic translation of our Torah. Yemenite Jews still recite it after the Hebrew Torah in their synagogues every Shabbat. Um, and in the Aramaic translation, every time these people are mentioned, our allies, our non-Jewish allies are mentioned in Aramaic, they're referred to as either Muslim or Islamic. And
Mm-hmm.
this is again first century. Okay, so I suspect that if Muhammad had access to our Torah, it would have been in Aramaic because that was a language that everybody spoke. And I
Mhm.
suspect that when he started the Islam, it was really to create the movement of righteous Gentiles, the movement that would bring not just the Torah to the people of Israel, but the Torah to the whole world, God's word to the whole world.
Well, there's two things we need to unpack here, right? So we have to, Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was illiterate. He did not know how to read or write. That's the first thing. The second thing is there was, if you look at the history, all the prophets that were sent, I would say 85% of the prophets were sent to the children of Israel, Bani Israel. And then you had some Arab prophets like Hud and Saleh, which I don't know if they're mentioned in the Torah, but they're mentioned in the Quran. Shu'aib, which is in English, Jethro, is mentioned in the Quran as well, or also in the Bible and the Torah. I'm not sure about that. But Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came, Islam came to spread all over the world. Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came to bring the Arabs back to monotheism.
Mhm.
Just like how the Jews, for example, one of your videos that you did with Tall, I think, talked about the Maccabee rebellion.
Mhm.
Why did it happen? Because the Maccabees saw their people going astray, taking in Greek culture, what they call it, polytheism. They built a statue on the Temple Mount of Zeus, which got out of hand, and they're basically getting into Greek culture. The Arabs, unfortunately, fell in the same trap. Let's say they created their own idols around the Kaaba, and then Muhammad SAW came to, number one, destroy the idols, and number two, bring back righteousness, because the Arabs are doing a lot of messed up things in their own land.
Right.
And then when Islam started spreading, uh, Islam, we call it the seal, the last religion, and Muhammad SAW was the seal of the prophets.
Mhm.
Islam was its own civilization at the end of the day, but the key of Islam is, number one, spread justice on the earth, and to basically everyone has their rights, and to spread Islam basically. But the thing that we know, I think we disagree with a little bit, because you said that because we're not foreigners, the Arabs and the Palestinians, we're not foreigners. This is also our land as well. And I feel that some Israelis, they don't see it that way for whatever reason, whatever lens they're looking at. And we have to understand that in order for us to cooperate with each other in this land, there has to be understanding. So, for example, when the Muslims went into Jerusalem under Umar bin Khattab, they allowed the Jews to come back because that was the just thing to do. That's justice, even though the Christians didn't want it to happen for whatever reason, because they have beef with the Jews over Jesus or whatever the thing
They
was.
still do.
Hmm?
They still do.
Yeah. And then you had the Crusades, which we all know what happened during that time.
Mhm.
And then when Salah ad-Din came back, he repeated the precedent of bringing the Jews back. And if you look at the whole Middle East, we're talking about Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, Morocco, Spain. Every time the Muslims ruled in these lands, the Jews were protected.
Mhm.
The Jews had better rights, and even the Hebrew University said this. But if you look at the current state of Israel today, right? What Palestinians envision, they don't envision the kingdom of Solomon or David. They envision these people that came. I'm telling you the Palestinian perspective, just how they think. People came from outside. They built settlements on our land with the help of the British. And then when the British left, with the backing of the West, they destroyed the towns, cities, and villages, and the Palestinians were kicked out and became refugees. And then for the last 75 years, you know what's happened with the wars and the expansion, whether it's in Lebanon, in Syria, in the West Bank, in Gaza, wherever you end. If you look at the politics Israel was involved in, Israel always sided with the West, whether it was the destruction of Iraq, the destruction of Syria, Libya, whatever. We could go on for hours talking about it. I think Israel can always turn back. God always gives the people time to turn back and to go to the truth. But I think today it's going to be very difficult for Israel to assimilate itself into the Middle East because of the damage that was done. Not only that, in my opinion, Israel is in danger because for the last 75 years, the West has been backing up Israel because of what we could argue why, the lobbying, the strategic alliance, whatever you want to call it. But we see the West is slowly falling and phasing out of the international game. And the countries in the East are now rising: Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, and maybe Afghanistan. So I think Israel is in trouble. Why? Because Israel, according to us, the Muslim like Ummah, they have sided with the bullies. They have sided with France and America and England. You brought up Algeria. Israel helped Algeria in exchange, and they helped also France and England during the Suez Crisis. And
Mhm.
Israel was kind of a pawn in
Yeah.
a way for the West. And now that the West is slowly phasing out, my question, who's going to protect Israel now? So Israel is in trouble, and Israel needs to understand that they're not in Europe, they're not in America, they are in the Middle East. Look at the neighborhood around them, and I think they're slowly realizing this, the people anyway, but the government and the military, they're not realizing it for whatever reason. And they have to understand that if they want, if Israel will stay for, let's say, the next 75 years or 100 years, they have to be a just nation and follow their books, because at the end of the day, God is the one who's going to stay the superpower, not America, not France,
Yeah,
not England, not Germany.
that's
And I
that's
think some Israelis don't get it.
that's exactly
Yeah.
it. Look, Israel today, Israel's ruling class wants to be part of the West and sees the West as the most morally advanced civilization that we should emulate and be like, etc. But it's not. It's corrupt, and it's, as you said, falling. Just like the Roman Empire fell, the current empires fall. Uh, but at the end of the day, it is the Creator who took us out of Egypt and gave us the Torah, who protects us and who guides us. And the people of Israel, not the ruling class, but the people of Israel know that and want that and are looking to live that way. Again, when I say that, I don't mean that everybody is looking to have their it's varying degrees of personal commitment. I'm not talking about people being coerced to behave this way or that way, but I'm saying that in general, people want to feel close to the Torah. People want to feel close to the Creator, and I think that, look, my understanding in terms of the relationship we could have, there's two important conversations. There's a conversation about the relationship between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and there's a conversation about the relationship between Israel and the Islamic world. I think those are two very important conversations. In terms of Israel and the Palestinians, I believe that the correct solution, the most just solution, is a one-state solution that is, as I said, deeply Jewish yet softly Jewish, and everybody's equal. Everybody has equal rights. Everybody has equal access. But we, the Jews, will subjectively experience it as a very deeply Jewish state, and Palestinians and even Jews that don't have a Jewish education would just see it as a democratic society where everybody's equal and everything's functioning very well. Meaning, for example, if we're living in Jerusalem and your dog damages my bicycle and we go to court and the judge rules according to the Torah's position on what is justice in that situation, unless you know that that's the Torah's position, you wouldn't know that he just ruled according to the Torah. Right now, today, a judge in Jerusalem might rule according to British law. Now, why would judges in Jerusalem rule according to British law? Like we have our own, for many, many, many centuries, our wisest, most righteous leaders developed a conception of justice for when one person's property damages another person's property, and what is justice in that situation. So that's not forcing people to be religious. Again, I want to make that clear. The goal here is not to coerce people's behavior or force lifestyles or choices on people they're not ready for. But as a society, we want to be holy. As a society, we want to be just.
I have a question on that, by the way.
Sure.
Yeah, my question is, because here's the problem in Israel. I see in Israel today. Israel, okay, because the West right now, my friend, I live in the West. It's crazy. We have drag queen shows in libraries. It's a jungle out here. I'm telling you, it's a jungle. What Israel needs to figure out is, are they going to be a Jewish state 100% following? Because a Jewish democracy, in my opinion, doesn't make sense. It's like saying Islamic democracy. You rule by the laws of God, or you don't rule by the rules of God. You go by your whims. So I think that's what Israel's going through right now. That's number one. Number two, talking about the relationship with the Palestinians and the Muslim world. This land, the Holy Land, is a waqf according to the Muslim world. This is a holy land, and Masjid al-Aqsa is holy, and it's Islam's third holy site. And we have a lot of Muslims in the Holy Land. Now, when you see, the Muslim world is going to be very, it's going to be very tricky, because the Muslim world are going to look at this, they're going to be like, okay, Israel's going to rule with the Torah and the Jewish law on our Palestinian brethren, and the Palestinians, they want to live based on the Sharia law.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's some similarities here and there, but the Muslim world will look at Israel because of the recent experience of 75 years of you could say, a conflict, occupation, whatever you want to call it. The amount of oppression, and they're not going, it's not, they're not gonna, it's not gonna be easy to convince them because of how much destruction and conflict and bloodshed there was. Number one. Number two, you're saying one state solution. Okay, to do this one state solution is going to be difficult. Why? Because if you look at the math, let's do the math. You have 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, 3 million in the West Bank, 2 million inside Israel proper. Okay, so if you do the math, 2 plus 3, 4, 2 plus 3, 5 million plus 2, 7 million Palestinians. I don't think the Israeli intelligence or the government or the army or the people will accept that, because guess what? The Arabs are going to be the majority. It's not going to work because of the security threat,
Well,
whatever.
let me
Um,
answer your first and your third question first, and then I'll get to your
okay,
second.
continue. No problem. My bad. I'm sorry.
No,
Continue.
so your first question was about democracy. Your third question was about demography, and your second question was about our relationship with Islam, which we'll just shelve for a second.
Yeah.
So first of all, when I say democracy, I know that there are a lot of people in Israel who think of democracy as like a synonym for westernization. But when I say democracy, what I mean is a system that empowers people to influence the structures they live under. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that's important to me. And I think the Torah actually presents us, it's actually Jethro, who presents us with a model of participatory democracy that I think can work and I think can make demography irrelevant. Meaning, instead of voting for somebody once every 4 years and then having him lie to you and betray you and make money on the side with the corporations that fund his campaign and whatever, instead of doing that every 4 years like morons, I think what we can do is get together every week. Every week, this is basically the model of democracy that is laid out for us. It's a participatory democracy. We get together. Let's say 10 people in a neighborhood get together. They appoint one person their captain of 10. He goes to a second meeting with 9 other captains of 10 from different neighborhoods, and then somebody becomes a captain of hundreds, right? And then he goes to a third meeting with 9 other captains of hundreds from different towns, and then he becomes, let's say, a member of Knesset, a member of parliament, right? And he
Yeah.
represents all the people that he was in the meeting with, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if he doesn't, if he betrays them, they don't vote him out in 4 years. They recall him the next week. He can still be part of the meeting, but he's no longer the captain. He's no longer representing them because he can't be trusted. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we could implement something like that, which would be democratic, really empower people. And everybody, whether they be Jew or Palestinian, can have the ability to join a meeting, to be part of this. Nobody has to. If somebody would prefer to stay home and watch TV, play with their kids, sure. But there's no there. But I think the idea of representative democracy, as it's understood in the West, that you have two candidates who are usually the same guy with the same background, with the same
One has R, the other one has D. That's it.
right, and they're being funded by the same corporations and lobbyists to do the same thing. Ultimately, okay, they differ a little bit on this issue that everybody's screaming about, but like on everything else, they're the same. On the economy, they're the same. On the wars, they're the same. On the on the issue on healthcare, they're the same. Like so I think that we can do better. So that model of democracy, I think, would actually be a Jewish model of democracy that would make our society a holy society, and people would really have influence over the structures they live under. I think it also makes demography irrelevant. Although I will tell you, the Haredi Jews, the Jews like with the black hats, they're the fastest growing population between the river and the sea. Palestinians and Jews like me are kind of tied for second place. So I think that either way, the country is going through many tumultuous changes. I think one thing we're seeing now with these like protests against the judicial reforms here is that the old ruling class, basically kind of like the westernized, like Tel Aviv, we want Israel to be an outpost of Western civilization in the Middle East. They're losing power just because they didn't have enough kids, just because they're too westernized. So
Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot of what's going on in Israeli society. And I get from the outside, it doesn't necessarily look good for Palestinians because the political representatives of the Jews who are becoming stronger don't like Palestinians. They see the Palestinians as the enemy. They see the Arabs as the enemy. So it's hard to see in the moment how these guys and their voters can actually take us somewhere better. But I think ultimately Israel's in the middle of a very messy transition period that will lead us somewhere better and will bring us closer to our true identity and to our roots and enable better relations with Palestinians and with our neighbors. But we're not there yet, and I don't expect it to come from these specific political figures. Meaning, I don't expect it
Yeah.
from individuals, but I think that there is a shift taking place, and it's important that we kind of keep our finger on the pulse of where Israeli society is going and where Palestinian society is going. We have, when we talk about what can work, what can't work, it's not enough to just look at Israelis and Palestinians as they are now. We need to look at the trajectories of both societies and how we can kind of like move forward together. In terms of our relationship with the Islamic world, I'll tell you how I see it, and I'll ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, my understanding is our ancestor Abraham had two missions in his life. The
Mm-hmm.
first mission was to spread knowledge and loyalty to the Creator. Knowledge
Mm-hmm.
and loyalty to the Creator. That was his mission, and he was a very successful traveling preacher. And what made Abraham different from the Hebrews who came before him is that he had a zero tolerance policy when it came to idolatry. That when it came to idolatry, he had a very militant posture. And therefore, the Creator chose him to create a nation, to be the progenitor of a special nation. And he was given a second mission to go to a very specific country and to create a nation that would exist in that country and create a holy society there. Now, his two eldest sons, Yishmael and Yitzchak, basically inherited those two missions. Yishmael inherited the first mission, and even though, as you said, the Arab peoples lost that mission, Muhammad returned it to them. And Yitzchak, my ancestor, inherited the second mission. And ultimately, I see these two missions as meant to exist in partnership. That Israel is meant to be a holy nation working in partnership with a global Islamic movement that is able to bring humanity to knowledge of the Creator and loyalty to the Creator. And that's how I would like to eventually, see things go. Now, we're not there yet. None of us are there yet. I don't know if we're ready for that, but that's where I'd like to see things ultimately move towards. Now, the question is, if the people of Israel, the children of Israel, Banu Israel, not Yehud, we're Banu Israel, like we're the children of Israel back on the stage of history, if we are living in our land according to the Torah, not according to the Quran, to the Torah, running our society according to justice as we understand it in our Torah, according to the Sharia that was given to us, will be considered Muslim by the Muslim world.
Because here's the thing: the Muslim world, because according to your books, the Torah, the name, I don't know if you know the controversy. There's a name called Muhammadin, but Muhammad, meaning Muhammad is mentioned in the Torah. Now the Muslims, they are the last religion. We cannot classify the Jews as Muslim, but we could classify them as Ahl al-Kitab, the Bani Israel, Ahl al-Kitab, people of the book, because they follow a different tradition. We wouldn't consider you Muslim, but we could consider you a just nation, a nation we can work with.
Okay.
Because if you follow, if Israel were to be run how Solomon and David ran that nation, then I don't see why the Muslim world will have problems with Israel. The problem is Israel is the way Israel has been ran the last 75 years, ever since God gave, we could say the British or whoever you want to talk to, ever since God gave them back the opportunity, let's say call it an opportunity to govern this land, they have done, in my opinion, some bad things.
Okay.
That need to be corrected.
Okay.
And every nation, if a nation it wants to stay as a superpower, God already gave the rules for that. You have to stay a just nation. And Israel has to look at their history Why were the Babylonians allowed to destroy the state of Israel? Why was the Roman Empire allowed to destroy the state of Israel? Because the children of Israel went astray. Same thing with the Muslim world. If you look at the Muslim world, the last, let's say, 1400 years, the reason why Muslims are where we're at today is because we do not follow the Sharia law. We do not follow the Quran. We have a lot of oppressors in our seats of power, and people who are not doing their duties as Muslims right now. So why my message to the Israeli people and Israeli government is very clear: is if they want, if in order for there to be peace in the Middle East, there has to be justice in the Middle East. Meaning, when a Palestinian goes and kills an Israeli, they have to be held accountable. When an Israeli goes and they burn a family alive, they have to be held accountable. There are some Israeli settlers, they do crimes and they're not held accountable. And that's why we see the violence today. That's number one. And number two, in the West Bank right now, we have separate roads. We have separate. There has been swaths of land that has been taken that the Palestinians have deeds to, and that in the court of law there has to be either compensation or there has to be the land has to be returned if we're going to be just here. And also, I think if justice is served, how because at the end, God says to be just. Doesn't matter from the Jewish perspective, Islamic perspective, however you coin it or you look at it, justice is justice. And I think Israel, which is following the rubric of Suleiman or they Prophet David, how they did it, how they lived 100%, no adding or subtracting. In my opinion, I think there will be peace because the Israelis will follow the original message. The problem today is that the Israelis have adopted the secular Western arrogance, and that's why they're in this pickle right now in the Middle East. They have to understand their, yeah.
I want you to know something.
Yeah.
If the Jews who live in the West Bank hear what you're saying, and I'm talking about the Jews in the West Bank are not monolithic, they're different types. But let's say the most violent Jews who live in the West Bank, who are, if they heard what you were saying right now, they would be interested in making an alliance with you. Because what you're basically saying, that's what they want. That those Jews, the most extreme Jews living in the West Bank, are interested in basically the kingdom of David and Solomon. That's what they want.
Okay, but then what would happen is this is when they're going to get pissed.
Perception. Here's the problem. Their perception is that the Palestinians or the Arabs are the enemies of Israel. Right? That's their perception. These are the enemies of Israel, and therefore they ask themselves, well, what would David do to the enemies of Israel if he were alive today? Right? And that's how they behave. That's what's going on here. So what I try to do in my work, because a lot of my work is bringing these extreme West Bank Jews to be in dialogue with Palestinian neighbors. What I try to do is change the role that we play in each other's stories. So the problem isn't the identity or the mentality or the desires or aspirations of the extremist Jews living in the West Bank. The problem is that he perceives the Palestinian as his enemy. If the Palestinian is not his enemy, then we could actually have a good partnership.
But I have a question. The question is, we have people who are evicted from their houses in Hebron, for example. For example, use Hebron as an example. And they're evicted, and we have like the Hebron massacre, and we have like a lot of bad things that are happening in Hebron today. Like Hebron is the most radical example. And people have been kicked out of their houses, and Israeli settlers take their houses. In a just country, these Palestinians would take their houses back. Just like, for example, in Iraq or in Syria or in Algeria, Jews have the right to go back to their property. Palestinians have the right to go
back. I don't think we're going to go back. I don't think Jews are going to return to those countries because we're in our country, and that's where that's where we're meant to be. But look, my rabbis, and actually, interestingly enough, the rabbi Harav Tzvi Yehuda Cohen Cook, who is really considered the spiritual leader of the Jewish drive to create communities in the West Bank, was very openly opposed to taking any Palestinian private property. His position was, we don't do that, we cannot do that. Okay, that's the spiritual leader of the, I'd say, what we call the ideological West Bank Jews. Uh,
Hmm.
Now that doesn't mean now there are some problems in terms of how the state of Israel and the courts of Israel have, in many different instances, changed the definition of property rights, and there's been all sorts of weird things going on our end that Palestinians aren't really responsible for. To be fair, like it's really an internal issue that Palestinians have been hurt by, but it's not, it's in any case, my position is we shouldn't take anybody's property and we shouldn't build on anybody else's land. um, and but I also acknowledge that many things happened. We've hurt each other in many different ways in the last century. It's true that Israel has more power. The power dynamics favor us. We're on top, which means I think it's our role to make the first move towards building trust. But that being said, I think again, this is not a reason for not trying, but I just wanted to be very clear what the challenge is. A lot of the Jews who are now in their 20s and 30s here grew up during the Second Intifada, where they
Hmm.
really experienced Palestinians as the enemy, drive-by shootings, bus bombings, suicide bombings, etc. These are things, and again, the majority of people on the Israeli side, not just in the West Bank, in Tel Aviv, in Netanya, and Haifa also, don't understand the story from the Palestinian perspective. Don't understand that Palestine. That's why you have all these like pro-Israel organizations on social media, criticizing Palestinians for handing out candy when when a Palestinian kills a Jew. I understand that. I understand that when a Palestinian kills a Jew, he really believes he's punching up. He really believes he's drawing the blood of his oppressor. And if I was him, I might hand out candy too. Like I get it. I don't criticize that, but at the same time, I understand that all these misunderstandings result from us really, really, really not understanding each other. And whether we want to make peace or we want to win, we have to be willing to engage the identity, the story, the narrative of the other without fear. Because if we don't do that, and even if we're committed to war, if we don't understand the other as the other understands himself, we're just going to be fighting our fantasy of who the other is and engaging in very counterproductive methods of struggle, both of us. And that's what we're
But
doing.
also,
We're
also actions need to be taken. Actions need to be taken to secure a peace, and that starts with being just with everybody. You
okay.
know,
Yeah, I agree. I agree that we
and you
need
said the
to,
private property. I agree with you that there are Jews out there, they don't want to take private property, but that has been done. For example, in Hebron, it's been done. Where I live, it's been done. And unfortunately, let's be honest, the settlers are not leaving. These people are they built these communities. They are not leaving the West Bank.
where do you live?
So, Ramallah,
Where?
Ramallah.
Oh, you're from Ramallah.
So, so you have settlements around there called Ofra, Beit Il, all those settlements,
Oh,
right?
I've lived very close to Ramallah. I live on a mountain very close to Ramallah.
So you've seen the expansion in the last 30 years, and they're not going anywhere. So the solution is very clear: either compensation or they have to have a deed to the land or something has to be done
Right.
because these grudges are going to stay because when injustice is done and it's not resolved immediately, it will fester and it will become like the 2000. And
Right.
I fear that where we're headed right now is that right now. We
Okay.
see it in the West Bank because you brought up, for example, during the second intifada.
But yeah, I think I think again I'm against, personally, I'm against any house demolitions, whether it's Palestinian homes or Jewish homes. I don't like forcibly evicting people from their homes, no matter who they are. So in a situation where you show me that a Jew is living on property that's legally owned by Palestinians, I would probably favor financial compensation in that situation, because unless the Jew is saying, "Oh, I'm willing to move" or whatever, because I just think that that's very problematic. If we had more time, I see we have 4 minutes left. Um,
Yeah.
if we and the truth is it's very late here, but if we had more time, I would want to talk about ways that we could theoretically address refugee issues.
We could do this in the next episode, in my opinion, because in my opinion, you're tired. You guys are like 6 hours ahead.
I
Here's
appreciate that. But I think yes, I think you kept saying this, and I want to just make sure that it's clear. I agree with you that
Yeah.
there is no peace without justice, and we need to, I got to be honest. I'm now speaking on behalf of my people. We've been through a lot of really traumatic persecution for 2,000 years. We have power for the first time in a long time, and we need to learn how to use it justly. And that's a
Correct.
process. We're now, I think, entering into adulthood. You could say that in 1948 we were like babies, and in the 1980s and 90s we were like teenagers, right? And the Oslo process was a lie. The two-state paradigm is a lie. And it was forced on us by the outside. It was forced by the Americans and the Europeans. We're not going to do that. We're not going to divide the land. The only solution, and listen, we have an obligation. The two commandments that the Creator gave to Abraham and to Yitzchak and to Yaakov were basically to Brit Milah, circumcision, and to possess the land. We're commanded to possess the land. The question is, can we do that in a way that is just and fair and good for everybody? But we're not going to leave. We're not going to retreat. The question is, can our society, as you said, can Israeli society transform into something that is reminiscent of the kingdoms of David and Solomon in the 21st century? Can Palestinians be included in a way that is good for them? Can we have justice in the land for every human being? And can we be allied with the Muslim world around us in trying to bring the word of the Creator to all of humanity?
Like I told you, man, I'm all for that. But at the same time, if these issues get resolved, Israel is gonna stay in for a long time. But if these issues do not get resolved, this is the Quran is very clear about it, that Israel might get destroyed if it does not stay on the right path. So,
All right,
like, I get.
we're trying to go on the right path, but it's a process. I don't want to ask you to be patient with us because I don't think that's fair. I think Palestinians have really, it doesn't feel right for me to ask a Palestinian to be patient until we get it together, until we become what we're supposed to be, because in the meantime, people are suffering. But the truth is, Israel is in a process of transformation, and we're going from a caterpillar to a butterfly. The Zionism that you've seen, the state of Israel that you've seen until now is the caterpillar. Now we need to turn into the butterfly, and I'm hoping that the butterfly will be a lot better for Palestinians than the caterpillar.
If it is, then Palestinians will put down their arms, and as long as justice is served, Palestinians will put down their arms and they will cooperate with Israel. But again, God puts a warning in all his scriptures. Every empire, whether Muslim, Jewish, Christian, they fall because they're unjust and they go astray and they become arrogant. If Israel becomes like the kingdom of Suleiman and David, I think we'll be fine. We'll be good.
For sure.
All right, man. I'll have you on the next episode, inshallah. After Ramadan. After Ramadan, I should have you on, talk about solutions and how we could build from that. All right, yalla.
Take care.
You too.